My former job at LIVERMORE Lab was as a physicist. I had been a tenured professor at Purdue University in the physics department, had appointments in electrical engineering and materials engineering. Came to Livermore to actually run an institute associated with working with universities. I was moved on to trying to solve technical problems for the National Ignition Facility. Then kind of tossed out on my own to sort of start recreating my career back at Livermore. That's kind of what happens to people. You get made an assignment to an important project many times, and then you're thrown back to try to establish your career. And that, so I was in the process of reestablishing my career in different guises, armor, and different other kinds of problems that I could apply my skills to. And I worked there for 8 years. So when they took my job, I mean, the thing is, as a scientist, it's many, many steps in the process to become a scientist in the first place. You start basically in junior high school, and you have to take certain courses all through high school to even get in the right programs. You go through college, you're undergraduate, you have to get a graduate degree, which is a very extensive, involved process. You do a postdoc, then you move on in your career. So it's a staged process, and every step is critical to moving to the next step. So when someone comes along and just basically throws you out in the street, they don't give you access to your email, they basically terminate your career at that point. It's not like a regular job. It was a true career that I had. And it basically created a lot of turmoil for the track I was on. And I really liked my job. I mean, I put a huge amount of investment up front. So when I was terminated, I believed I had some legal rights, but I did not know the details or what was available to me or what was possible. There was a process at the laboratory where you could challenge the layoff, and I went through that process where, and they actually assigned an investigator, someone from the lab, to actually look at my situation. And he noted a lot of several anomalies, but he said that he felt that ultimately it was justified. I can tell you that some of the statements that were in that interview by him were false statements, that's for sure. I mean, it's come out in this court case that they were false statements.
Yeah, I started the lab in 1976. I was there for 32 years, working all over the laboratories. I was in the construction trade, working for plant engineering, and so I was able to work at all the buildings all around the laboratory, working for the facility people. You know, what they need as far as equipment, building new labs and stuff like that. So we also helped all the experiments. If they needed concrete pads, we poured concrete pads and drilled holes through walls for their experiments. Basically, just helped the whole and maintained the whole facility. You know, we worked for the plant engineering. We were able to work all over the laboratories as electricians, carpenters, laborers, painters. So we basically took care of the laboratory. I really loved my job. I mean, it was my family. I mean, I worked there for 32 years, and I considered all the people I work with friends, family, because I was there a long time and through a lot of events. In '81, when the big earthquake hit, we went all over the laboratory searching for people that were buried underneath cabinets and stuff like that. '89, there was another big earthquake, and we were there, 16, 20 hours a day, just maintaining fixing the broken pipes, gas leaks, and look for any damage. So we basically, it was part of my family. It was my family.
In this insider exclusive Investigative Network TV special, our news team goes behind the headlines in Lawrence Livermore Labs, protecting employees' rights in the new age of privatization, to take a good look at what really happens when private companies become government contractors. Unfortunately, in some economic circles, the obsession with privatization as a cure-all for all government and bureaucratic inefficiencies by big business and their political allies who continue to make false promises to the American public that this is the best way to save tax dollars and provide better services or products and create jobs is still a popular theme. But taxpayers and Congress would be wise to do more than beware of these false promises and hopes. They should take a good look at what happens when private corporations become government contractors, unencumbered by scrutiny and driven by self-interest and short-term profit. They ignore the nation's fair employment laws and dodge accountability. In instance after instance, privatization reduces quality and fails to save money. The cost savings achieved through privatization, if any, simply involves laying off workers and doing less, or reducing workers' wages and benefits. The Government Accounting Office has found that contractors routinely fail to pay required wages. These aren't the kind of efficiency gains promised through privatization, and these savings in wages are commonly offset by the profits extracted by corporate privateers. In this insider-exclusive network TV special, we go on location in Oakland, California, to visit with Gary Gwilliam and Randy Strauss, partners at Gwilliam, Ivory, Chioso, Cavalli, and Brewer, who took on government agency giant Lawrence Livermore National Lab in a wrongful termination case in which 130 workers were laid off in 2008, and almost 7 years later, successfully proved they were in violation of existing layoff policies. If ever there was a poster boy for privatization gone bad, this was it. Existing policies required most employees be laid off in inverse order of seniority, yet the average age of employees laid off was 56 with an average seniority of 20 years. Having experienced no layoffs over the previous 35-year period, Lawrence Livermore Labs began laying off workers after the lab was privatized in 2007. The U.S. Department of Energy awarded the contract for both labs, Lawrence Livermore in the San Francisco Bay Area and Los Alamos in New Mexico, to a single private partnership comprising the University of California Regents, Bechtel Corporation, and other private companies. This created the holy grail of unaccountable profiteering. Not just a for-profit monopoly, but a taxpayer-funded for-profit monopoly. But the privatization of the university management arrangement turned out to make things worse. Right off the bat, the combined management fees footed by the taxpayer rose at least $240 million over 6 years. Over 430 employees were given 1 hour to pack up their belongings while being watched, had their badges confiscated, then were perp-walked out the gate like common criminals. The layoffs of career scientists and researchers drained the lab of experience and know-how, certainly not a move that enhances national security and readiness. This privatization exercise in waste and profiteering is not just a ripoff of taxpayers. There's accompanying human tragedy made far worse by the way in which the Bechtel Consortium laid off workers. In a classic David versus Goliath legal battle, Gary and Randy and their team of lawyers took on Lawrence Livermore Labs' team of 1,200 lawyers in 2008 and won a $37.25 million settlement on behalf of the wronged workers 7 years later in 2015. Gary and Randy were willing to stay the course and fight to the bitter end, no matter how big the defendant, to champion the cause of these 130 hardworking, dedicated employees whose rights were so clearly violated and disregarded by Lawrence Livermore Lab and Bechtel Corporation. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Oakland, California. It is my great pleasure to introduce Gary Williams to the show and Randy Strauss. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In this particular case, this is a wrongful termination case, correct?
Right.
Of about, you represented 130 employees that used to work at Lawrence Livermore Labs, correct?
Correct.
And one day they were randomly terminated, all right? Employees have rights. We'll get into those in a minute. But tell our audience a little bit about some of the clients that you represented, particularly the ones that we're featuring on this show, Mike and Mario.
Mike was a very well-known and successful physicist. He was one of a number of scientists that were suddenly laid off on May 22nd, 2008. They were supposed to be laid off in inverse order of seniority. That means that the newest employees go first. They did exactly the opposite. They took a very seasoned veteran, people who've been there for many years and fired them all. This all came about after the Bechtel Corporation had taken over the lab in October of 2007. But Mike McElfresh was one of a number of very fine scientists who were suddenly thrown out of a job simply because Bechtel wanted to save some money.
Right. And Mario, I understand, worked there for 32 years.
Mario was
Started as a gardener.
That's right. Mario worked at the lab for 32 years, as you said, and really busted his hump for this company. He was a guy who got up every day and worked with his hands and his tools and dedicated his career. In fact, he was on disability the day he was laid off. He was called at home and told, don't come back when you're feeling better.
And I want to emphasize that 32 years, you don't stay at a job 32 years, and I don't know how long Mike was there, I think 8 years. Yeah. You don't stay at a job unless you have good performance reviews. Companies don't pay somebody unless they're doing their job, right?
This was absolutely not a performance-based
So
layoff.
they had good performance reviews. There was no reason to let them go, except let's talk about this case. And let's talk about why this even developed. And it's an issue called privatization, correct?
Correct.
A consortium of companies led by Bechtel, correct, made a sales pitch to the United States government that said, we can run the Lawrence Livermore Labs and one other lab, correct? What was the other lab?
The lab in
Los Alamos
Labs.
National Lab.
We can run it cheaper, more efficiently, etc. And with their politician buddies, okay, they got this approved, correct? And what actually happened?
The George W. Bush administration.
Yeah, what actually happened? They took over 2007. Was it 2007?
October 1st.
What did they do to run it more streamlined, more efficiently, to run it more profitably? Or am I using the wrong words?
Well, clearly, they promised the federal government they'd save $50 million a year for 3 years. How are they going to save $150 million? They don't have a product they can reduce on. So immediately, as soon as they took over, and frankly, even before then, they began planning to lay off their more senior, older workers. Why senior, older workers? Because they make more money.
Right.
And so they very cynically went about trying to decide how many of these people laid off, bean counters, how many do we need to lay off who are making this much money in order to save this? And they ended up with about 440 people.
Right. And you ended up representing 130 of them.
The irony is that at the same time they're picking the workers to let go, they're bringing in Bechtel folks who are earning high salaries as an extra layer of management that hadn't been at the lab before.
Really?
So at the
So
same
they're
time,
replacing one person with another, and the one they're replacing really makes more money.
that's absolutely true.
So, and this was proven to be true because over a period of, what was it, 6 years or something, they spent more than 200, they went over budget, something like 250 or $80 million, correct?
Well, they were
Rather than reducing.
Yeah, I don't think they ever did save that much money. I don't know the final figures on how much money they saved, but it was a cynical effort that caused a lot of people a lot of pain and harm.
Whenever you have a case like this, you had a lot of people who were wronged.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking on a giant, Bechtel. They have, how many lawyers did they have? 1,200?
Well, yeah, we had 6 and they had 12. They had
12. When you say
they had
1,200,
200 times as many lawyers as we did, but
were
we
these
had
law firms or were these?
we had them right where we wanted them.
Yeah, but were these law firms or were these lawyers?
One major law firm, but
Yeah.
don't forget, Steve, that we weren't just taking along Bechtel. We were taking on the United States government.
Yeah.
The Department of Energy was funding this and paid for all of those expenses.
Yes.
So Bechtel, it didn't cost the private company anything.
Yeah.
It cost the taxpayer a lot of money.
And then that's one of the reasons why the litigation went on so long,
Yeah.
because Bechtel and the lab really had nothing to lose. We, the taxpayers, were funding the
Yeah.
litigation.
So when you take on a company like this, what was their initial response?
Well, I think they knew that there was some exposure going in, but no sooner did the lawyers get in there than we launched into heavyweight serious litigation. Although there were some attempts to settle them early, they weren't really serious, and all we saw was motions, depositions, litigation, scorched earth litigation. Spend as much money as you can, try and spend us into settling cheap, and that went on for 7 years.
Yeah, and I want to point out to our audience that your law firm is a plaintiff's law firm.
Right.
You work on contingency.
Correct.
So when you take a case on like this, you're spending your money,
Right.
and they're spending the government's money.
That's right.
And the
Absolutely true.
government has unlimited resources. They have unlimited money, so they can drag this out in hopes that you'll give up.
I
Right?
think that's absolutely right. And to be perfectly honest, our firm was stretched to
Yeah.
pursue this litigation, but we stuck with it.
What was kind of the turning point in settling this case? Because it took 7 years, right?
Well, I think part of it was that we had a new administration coming in, and I think finally some people at the top decided that they wanted to make some sense of this. So I think that there was not only legal pressure, but there was political pressure for them to finally bring this to resolution, and that's why it settled in 2015.
Right. And it settled for, if I remember correctly, $37 million
Correct.
For these 130 clients, correct?
Yes.
Was that a fair settlement, would you say?
Well, look, it was a compromise settlement. Each of our clients had a lot of economic loss. They'd worked there for years. And think about this, Steve. These are people in their 50s, some of them in their 60s, most of them in their late 40s and 50s. What chance did they have to get a job in May of 2008,
Yeah.
at the beginning of the worst recession all of us have seen in our lifetime?
Right.
And they were thrown into the job market, having worked at the lab for 20, 30 years or more. So they all had, it all cost them a lot of real serious money. So what we were able to do is we were able to get some of that back for them
Right.
after a long time. And I think after 7 years, our clients were very faithful. They hung in there with us, but they were tired. And I'm very proud of what we got, because whereas you didn't get anything, and very often you don't get everything you want in litigation, we got something that was significant to them. And I will tell you this, Steve, I believe that almost to a person, there's just the vast majority of these clients were very appreciative of what we've done and very happy to get the case resolved.
Good. We have with us today your clients. One of them is Mario Jimenez, and the other one is Mike McElfish. Is that the correct
McElfish, right.
Okay, and we're going to bring them on right now.
Okay.
Wonderful.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Mike McElfish to the show. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you.
We know somewhat of, you were a physicist at Lawrence Livermore Labs,
Yeah.
and randomly dismissed, like thrown under the bus. And Gary has told us about how over a period of 7 years, your case was successfully finally settled. Tell our audience a little bit about how this whole experience, you know, you're a scientist, you're a physicist, you're a bright guy. You dedicated your life to science, how you felt treated by the way Lawrence Livermore Labs dismissed you so handily.
Well, it was a very insulting and offensive way that we were dismissed. Basically we got a telephone call that morning that we were going to, and I personally was waiting for that call. I actually expected to be dismissed because of some whistleblower activity I had done completely internally at an earlier stage. And so they basically told you, don't touch anything in your office.
Yeah.
We're going to be there in a few minutes.
Yeah.
And then they
Treated you
watched
like a criminal.
basically
right?
a criminal. Then we had to go over to
Yeah.
this assembly line process where they basically had a lot of police presence. They had the Alameda County Sheriff,
Right.
outside the laboratories, security there, giving a show of force and sort of
Right.
intimidating us, I would say.
Did you go to work in another place after this?
I've been working at several different places
Okay,
over the
did
years.
this bring a stigma to you applying to another position?
Let's say it severely disrupted the continuum or of my career. Okay, as I mentioned, I believe that you start off by, you start off in junior high school to become a scientist. If you're going to, and then you work through high school to make sure you take all the right courses. You have to go through college to take all these courses. Then you're graduate school, postdoc, and so forth. It's not a.
So you like pour yourself into a project.
You pour yourself
because you dedicate yourself to it.
I mean, look, an 80-hour week was nothing for most of my career. 80-hour work week, okay? And people could say, well, how can you do that?
Because you love what you do.
Yeah, I mean, my job was my hobby. It was my pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gary and his firm labored and pursued this case 7 years. It's a long time.
Right.
What do you think about the job they did for you guys?
That was a great job. And there was no way little guys like us could have won against a behemoth like the laboratory with the backing they had, the resources they had. It was amazing that they had the stamina, in my opinion, to hold out for this whole process. It was scary to watch, actually, because, I mean, after a couple of years of them pushing back and all these different court actions, you start getting kind of nervous. I mean, how much stamina can these guys have? How can they afford to keep doing this for us? Mm-hmm. And it just...
The question probably keeps coming up in your mind is there justice? Right?
I didn't have a lot of faith in the justice system before, and I honestly don't have any today.
Yeah.
So,
well,
at least for the little guy. Okay.
Yeah. I want to thank you very much for being on the program. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
It's my great pleasure to introduce Mario Jimenez to the show. Welcome to the show, Mario.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
You're a 32-year veteran at Lawrence Livermore Labs.
That's correct.
And you started as a gardener, and you went all the way up to basically taking care of anything and everything that needed to be done at Lawrence Livermore, right?
That's correct.
And one day, while you were at home recovering from knee surgery, right?
That's correct.
You got a phone call. Basically, it said you're fired.
Basically, don't come in. Turn in your badge.
You had excellent performance reviews.
Yes.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have kept you for 32 years. Probably making a pretty good living, right?
Yes.
And all of a sudden, the rug is pulled out from underneath you.
That's the way you felt, that's for sure.
What went through your mind?
Panic. Like I say, I was recovering, and my wife doesn't work, and she had her ailments too. So I was scrambling. My mind was racing.
Yeah.
Didn't know what to do. How to get another job with my ailments and still recovering.
Right.
So it was very scary. Very scary.
Now, Randy and Gary represented you and 129 other wronged employees for 7 years. And they finally settled the case, and they were up against a behemoth, Bechtel, the U.S. government, etc. Tell our audience a little bit about how you felt the job that they did.
Oh, they did tremendous, and I'm so glad that they stuck with it, because I knew that the other side was just prolonging, and every year went by, and I says, God, I hope they don't give up. In my heart, I hope they don't give up, and they didn't. They really stuck it out. And I'm very, very fortunate that they did, because, we were able to win some money, and that helped.
Yeah.
That helped very much.
In the legal business, there are law firms that just stop representing clients, aren't they?
Well, unfortunately, that can happen. And,
because it's usually a money thing, isn't it?
It very well can be, and some firms just can't afford to carry the load.
And that's important when you choose a law firm to represent you, because you have to look at, sometimes it's the long haul.
Absolutely, and
right.
You want to make sure you have a firm that can fight the fight and hang in there with some deep pockets.
Yeah. Well, you certainly did a great job, and you have great clients. I'm glad they were here today, and I want to thank you very much for being on the show, Mark.
Thank you, Steve.
A lot of folks who are watching this show have questions that, pop up in their mind when things like this happen to them. Like, for example, what is the wrongful termination law in California? What is it?
Well, most Californians who don't work for the public government are at-will employees. They can be fired for any reason. So in order to have a wrongful termination case, you generally have to be in a protected class. So You can't fire people because of their sex. You can't fire people because of their race. And you can't fire people because of their age, which is what behind this case.
Mhm.
And then you also can't fire people that are whistleblowers. So they have to have some protected class in order to have a wrongful
Yeah.
termination.
So
case.
let me answer this question. Most employees at private corporations all around the country, unless they have signed a contract, upper management, right?
Right.
They're at will, aren't they?
That's absolutely true.
So at any time, somebody can make a phone call like they did to Mario, right? And say, hey, you're done, right? Clean out your desk.
That's right. In the Lawrence Livermore Lab case, however, they did have a contract by virtue.
They did.
They did, by virtue of the fact that the lab used to be run by the University of California. And as employees of the University of California, they had contractual rights that transferred over when Bechtel took over.
Ah.
They could only be fired for good cause, but that's a rare exception. So
Yeah.
we did have that in addition to our age discrimination. We had a breach of contract case,
Right.
which was very important because they could only be fired for good cause.
I'm just curious, with a precedent-setting case like this, has University of California changed their employment contracts? Or is that a state-ordered type law?
They actually have. And
A
that
law.
good
Or they've changed the
No,
law?
they've changed it. That good cause requirement for the vast majority of University of California employees no longer exists.
Seriously,
Seriously.
as a result of this case?
In part.
Okay. And that's one of the reasons we want to do this, because a lot of people, when they walk into your office, say, I was wrong. Do I have rights? Okay. At-will employees don't really have any rights unless they're in a protected class, correct?
Correct.
Okay. University of California employees don't have that right anymore, as these folks did, right?
That's true.
What do you have to say to an employee that gets fired, terminated, whatever? What are their rights if they think they have been wrongfully terminated? How do they determine that? Come into a lawyer and tell them the facts, or what?
Go ahead.
Well, absolutely. You really have to talk to them and learn their story and find out what they know about the reasons for their termination. Obviously, first you determine if they are in fact in a protected class, which can be readily determined, and then you look to see if there's any indication
Right.
that protected class was one of the reasons why they were selected.
Right. It seems to me this issue of privatization is an issue, especially with the current administration, that will continue to blossom, if you will, to expand, because as you both know, under the previous president, Obama, he tried to get an infrastructure program passed by Congress for 8 years. It didn't fly. We need to rebuild our roads, our bridges, our dams, that sort of thing, right? But apparently the Republicans now have got a plan where they are going to privatize the contractual obligations of companies so that they can make some money, but we lose control. The taxpayer loses control.
Yeah. Good example is the prisons. There are a bunch of other people. They started to move back away from privatization of the prisons, but that's been very controversial, and,
Right.
and they have not. It hasn't worked out very well. But this idea that some private company is going to run it better than government is, in my opinion, a bad experiment that hasn't worked.
I think one of the problems is there's nobody regulating them. Isn't that right?
That's a huge
I mean,
problem.
you look at Bechtel, for example. Okay, for how many years they ran over budget, $200 and some million, right? Who was checking that? Who was saying to them, wait a minute, you made a proposal that you would save $40 million a year, and look where we are here, right?
Well, Steve, you had alluded to this a little earlier. Bechtel is an extremely powerful and well politically connected organization, particularly with the Bush family, and it's no coincidence that they came in under the Republicans and that they had a lot of political power and influence that led them to take over this very lucrative contract, not only with this lab, but with a number of other labs around the country.
Right.
So Bechtel is the largest construction company in the world, and they have will benefit greatly by this privatization experiment that, in my opinion, is not working.
Okay. I want to thank both of you for being on the program. Congratulations on the case. And we hope you can help other people out there, because you guys got the experience. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Steve.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.